My name's Chris C., 27 years old. Well, I mean, since I was a teenager, I've practically managed to go through most things you can name, but my drug of choice towards the end was heroin and crack cocaine. Like heavy, once it had become a problem, like noticeably a problem. 19, 5 to 6 years. Yeah. Yeah, what it was like, I mean, besides it being the worst thing I'd ever experienced in my life, both physically and emotionally, I mean, obviously it started off as fun and games, right? Throughout the later teenage years, I went through many different phases, but each one of them sort of involved different activities where drugs would be very prevalent, and a lot of it was experimentation at the start, but obviously you reach that point somewhere where it started to affect all the behaviors, and obviously there was a lot of stuff going on in my life, or stuff that happened throughout my childhood that obviously impacted me in a great way, and at the time I didn't even realize there were all these things that had happened. It was that feeling of emptiness I had experienced that were influencing me in every way, so eventually obviously became a coping mechanism for me. It's funny to think back on it now, because if you ask any average person or told them that you were doing heroin, that would be like very surprising to them. That would come up as like, red flag type of deal right away, but nah, I progressively found heroin, and I was already an anxious kid, so I never really enjoyed doing uppers, and that wasn't my thing. And I think when I first discovered heroin, it completely matched my personality and gave me that feeling of something that was missing my entire life. So again, even with the heroin, it started off, things weren't terrible. What got bad is how the more that I used it, eventually it progressed in the way I was taking it, where I would go from smoking it at first, and then eventually that wasn't enough. Started snorting it at one point. That lasted a little while as well, and eventually I wasn't getting the same hit from it that I craved at the start. And I was dating this girl at the time. She had been using intravenously for a long time, and I'd be hanging out with her and other friends, and again, everyone was getting way more fucked up than I was. One day I asked her to shoot me up, and it was always someone else doing it for me for a long time, just because I had that phobia of needles, or at least I thought I do. I think a lot of people think that's a deterrent for them until they start using. But yeah, it got to the point where I wasn't scared of them anymore, and I wanted to be able to do it on my own and not tell people about what was going on. And I learned how to do it on my own, and I could go into describing a lot of the mayhem that the use eventually progressed into. It was replacing and managing all these feelings that I had never dealt with in my life, But, I could just say that by the end of the 5-year run, 6-year run, 2 of my best friends had passed away from drug overdoses. Got to the point where I was doing it in my family home, and my family found out, and it went on and caused a lot of chaos for many months, probably even years, until one day they got fed up and I got kicked out onto the streets. Had about 3 overdoses that came very close to taking my life. By the end, just towards the very end, I'd say about 4 months out, it got to the point where I had a couple significant conversations with very close friends of mine. All of them, the people that were actually left in my life, 2 of my closest friends, we had very difficult conversations where they sort of put the idea in my mind that I might need treatment just because they saw exactly what was going on. And obviously there's a lot more detail in between there, but that leads up to the point where I'm basically receiving outside help. This was about halfway through COVID, and there was a big lockdown going on. I got connected with this one organization that said that most of the facilities were not doing inpatient at the time, and I got put in this online group through Zoom. That was a joke, or at least I saw it as a joke at the time. At that point, I was way too far gone to where I couldn't put enough separation in between myself and the drug long enough to get better. So the meeting didn't happen. I end up continuing on to use. My family notices because now I've put the thought in their mind that I'm going to treatment and nothing's getting better and there's no progression in that way. So they were concerned, and they were basically fed up at the time. That was sort of their bottom line. After all the conflict and the stealing from them, and, having the girl over and the overdoses, and I was gone all the time. I was never home. And it was basically just a big back and forth line game, and them putting it off and avoiding what was happening, but at the same time me doing my very best to manipulate them at any chance that I got. Yeah, that's the start of a 4-month stay, which is a completely separate story. But yeah, that's how it was. So my brother ends up getting involved at some point, and he has a contact with a friend of his who was treated by someone when they were away in the hospital in the psychiatric ward, and he's heard of this fellow who helps people, intervenes in their life, and gets them in contact with the appropriate treatment. My brother ended up giving him a call, and he reaches out to me. We get in contact over the phone, and we sort of start the process there on coming up with a treatment plan and what I was going to do. And so there was a lot of back and forth with that. Again, that wasn't the moment like I just decided I was going to treatment. There was a lot of resistance in between. Couple attempts at, again, working my parents so that I wouldn't have to go. And I basically get kicked out onto the streets. I get taken back in at some point. I get kicked out again. And then finally, I come to the conclusion that it would be better to go through this whole process instead of living on the street, you know? It wasn't exactly something I wanted for myself, or at least I was too scared to get engaged with it or involved with it. But I end up in a detox in Ontario. A 6-day stay so that they can get me off of the methadone and detox my body from that. And then I'm supposed to fly to a treatment facility in South Carolina. I go to the detox. I meet a bunch of dummies. People who have been very wealthy people who go to that detox about 3 times a year. Every time they get out, they continue to use and then come back to that same treatment facility, and they were basically rinse and repeating this process because none of them wanted to get better. None of them actually wanted to stay off drugs. And I go to this place for 7 days. I get out of it. Immediately I have this boost of energy. I feel so good. I text my girlfriend to break up with her. I think I'm cured type of deal. I get driven back to my city in Montreal. And I'm home for about 5 hours. Spending the day with one of my best friends, a friend that's completely clean and off of drugs. I spend the day with him, and the second he leaves, this thought came into my mind that, you know, there was nobody around and I was completely free and unaccountable. And I decided to walk 15 minutes to my dealer's house, buy heroin, get high, spend that entire 3 days before I'm supposed to fly away to South Carolina, just going on a bender. Get on a plane on a Tuesday, I fly to South Carolina. Again, I think I'm going to summer camp. You know, I'm going to go to this place, I'm going to spend a couple months there. I'm going to get the heroin out of my system. I may go back to smoking or drinking, but we'll deal with the heroin because the heroin's the problem. And again, I really didn't want to be homeless, so let's get here to South Carolina. And I wind up at the treatment center, basically a campground with different cabins and bunk beds out in the forest, basically out in the woods. And I'm feeling good for about a day. Gets to the second day, I start withdrawing from the heroin and the little bit of Suboxone that they managed to get me down to in detox. I wasn't completely off everything, but I was at about a 1 milligram dose of Suboxone, which was the best they could do for me in the week. And so I started withdrawing, and I immediately wanted to leave. I tried to leave the treatment center that I was in, and I go up to the cabin, the staff cabin, all sick and crying and wanting to leave, and I knock on the door, and it just so happened to be the time of day where all the staff on the property have a meeting with the owner. And I walk in. It's probably the worst time you could choose to leave a rehab, when all the staff are right there all together. And they got me on the phone with my friend, the man who had sent me to treatment. And he gave me the final rundown, you know. I was trying to convince him to let me come back to Montreal and go to a facility there or something. But he knew what was best, and you know, he contacted my parents, and they like cut my phone service. They immediately again draw their bottom lines, you know, and it was just terrible the way that they were destroyed after all the struggle they had gone through trying to get me on the plane to go there. Now I was trying to leave. Yeah, and my friend gave me the rundown. He said, you know, you're already there, and bottom line, if you come back, there's nothing for you here. But it was the sound of my parents' voices, you know. I think in that moment of clarity, even though I was extremely sick, my mind was present, and you know, I made the decision to stay. I broke down, and I knew I couldn't go back to Montreal. I knew I couldn't continue to put my family through everything that had happened and what was happening, and so I stayed. Rehab taught me the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, so that was basically the start of my recovery. I mean, and it was more than that. It was a non-medical facility, and it's not like they had therapists or counselors, but in terms of behaviors and getting me to question myself and like developing these important things like a routine, as well as to separate me long enough for me to be able to start and figure out, you know, like what I want to do with the rest of my life, who's the person that I want to be. And so I got out and I did exactly what they told me I should do, you know. I immediately got connected with my recovery community. And it's funny because that's, you know, at the time there were no in-person meetings where I was at, and that's when I joined the online meeting that I met you in. So yeah, I met a lot of people through this online meeting based out of Reno. And I got involved with that group for about 6 months. And I think that put me in a great position to where, you know, got me stabilized back in my life. My life is better than it's ever been. Better than I ever thought it could actually get. You know, for beginners. Obviously it involves a lot of work and daily maintenance. I mean, along with everything that was going on in terms of rebuilding my family, working on those relationships, getting involved in a new career. There's just been so many opportunities put in front of me since I got sober. You know, I work in one of the best restaurants in Canada right now. You know, my boss, who's also in recovery, I got matched with him, and like, you know, it was an opportunity like I could never imagine. And even though I'm sort of transitioning out of that business and line of work, I'm starting off on a new venture where I got certified as a recovery coach in order to sort of help people tackle the problems that I dealt with growing up and went through with my addiction. And I'm working with the man who got me into treatment. You know, I have this opportunity to learn from one of the best, and it's almost indescribable. You know, there's been a lot of therapy involved also, and I've come to this place where, you know, every day is a learning opportunity where I'm just getting more and more comfortable with myself and learning so much about myself in terms of what I want and where I want to be in life. Some of the things I value the most in terms of helping people and being involved in a career such as that, and all the people I've met along the way. Again, like this guy sitting in front of me. My life is just so meaningful. And I think just that alone has been something that I never would have thought possible before. I can't even say that every day is easy. It's not. You know, a lot has happened over these last 2 years where one of my ex-girlfriends passed away from an overdose. My best friend from Tennessee passed away from a drug overdose. You know, my family's been having a lot of hard times. I lost all my teeth. You know, I had a surgery where I had to get that taken care of. Another thing where dealing with sort of the damage from the past that we've caused to ourselves and others. But it's all just become extremely manageable. You know, and then especially after having 2 years and starting to gain some of the emotional sobriety and stability back in my life, you know, I don't think, act, or feel the same anymore. I've rebuilt these connections with my family. You know, I'm still living there. It was, I'd say, a temptation and something that I felt like rushing, trying to get out of the house right away and, you know, wanting to be more independent and living this new lifestyle. But I came up with a plan over these past 2 years, and I have a vision of where I want to be and where I'm going, and there's no need to rush anything at this point in time. My family, in terms of just the dynamic between myself and them, you know, just the fact that my life is intact and I'm not that outside stressor on their marriage anymore, and I'm not the person they have to constantly worry about, and my mom, you know, staying up at night wondering where's her son at, like, is she gonna get that phone call, is we gonna find out something terrible happened the next day. None of that is there anymore. I have the opportunity to know my mom and my father, develop this relationship with my brother where, you know, we've never been the most outspoken and emotionally vulnerable family around, but, you know, we've made lots of strides. You know, my father's proud of me. My mother gets to have me, her son, her baby boy in her life. We're there to share in the experience of being a proper family, whatever that means. You know, our vision of what a proper family is. Thank them deeply. I'm extremely grateful to my father especially, but my father made a tough decision at one point where, you know, when he kicked me out on the street, I can't begin to imagine how difficult that would be for a father. I have such an amazing community of people around me, not only through the meetings, but just friendships with normal people. And learning to navigate those situations and come up with this philosophy of what I truly want and value in friendships, where the crowd I hang with today is nothing like the crowd I used to hang with. There's just so much kindness and support and people that uplift me. And so I'm training 5 days a week. That's become my number one hobby, just getting my body back into shape, and one of the ways I've learned to care for myself. I think the best piece of advice that I spoke about actually a bit once I got my 2 years was to take it kind of slow. Obviously do your step work and get that done as honestly and quickly as you can, but just in terms of being abstinent, you don't have to fix everything all at once. I'm in recovery.
You asshole.